I have been researching Worlds of Fun history for 30 years now, and I've been running worldsofFun.org since 1997. A little bit of back history on myself. I actually did meet my husband for the very first time at the park 26 years ago. It was August of 1998, and I've been coming to the park since 1983. Do we have a slide? There, go back. There we go. I chose to use this slide because I love the history of the Worlds of Fun logo, that from the very beginning it's had the hot air balloon logo. We'll look at that here in just a second. Now you can go forward. All right, so the history of Worlds of Fun starts like a lot of other theme parks from that era. In 1957, park visionary Jack Stedman visited Disneyland, and in 1961 he went to Six Flags Over Texas. Now, he didn't initially present the idea of a theme park to Lamar Hunt. That took a couple of years. In June 1967, Jackson County residents approved a $43 million bond to build a dual stadium complex. And I know this is a World of Fun presentation, not a Chiefs presentation, but they are directly tied to each other. After that bond was approved in late 1967, Jack Stedman then presented the idea of a theme park to Lamar Hunt. They wanted to reinvest the profits from the Kansas City Chiefs back into Kansas City, and they thought that would be a great way to do so. Now, originally, the park wasn't planned for here. It was actually planned for right next to Arrowhead Stadium. And that might sound like another park, actually, which is kind of interesting because in 1969 and 1970, Jack Stedman took his whole family on a road trip across the country to get ideas for his theme park, and one of the parks that he visited was Astroworld. He also visited Six Flags Over Texas again, and Six Flags Over Georgia. Now, in May of 1969, when they realized that that land next to Arrowhead wasn't going to be enough land, they chose to purchase the 418 acres in Clay County for a theme park similar to Disneyland and other commercial facilities. You can go. So, as some of you know, Worlds of Fun was designed by Randall Duell, who designed many other theme parks of that era. Randall Duell started out life as the art director at MGM Studios, so it only made sense that when MGM did its backlot auction in May of 1970, they would go ahead and attend that. So Lamar Hunt and Jack Stedman went to the MGM backlot auction in 1970, and they came home with a lot of different props. They bought the Cotton Blossom for $15,000. And it was used in the 1951 musical Showboat. They bought the Victrix, which is kind of like a pirate ship. And that was a 110-foot tall, four-masted schooner that was over in Scandinavia, where Sea Dragon is now. And that was used in the movie All the Brothers Were Valiant, which Randall Duell was art director of. They also bought a lot of other wagons as the puppet show wagon as part of the MGM backlot auction as well. Go ahead. All right, so we move on to groundbreaking, which occurred on November 10, 1971. Here's an interesting story with this, is that they actually started construction of the park in September of 1971. They actually just didn't have the date to get everybody together until November 10th of 1971. And this is where I mentioned the Worlds of Fun balloon logo comes into play. This is when that logo was first announced by the park, and it has remained, with some slight variations, the logo for the park to this day, which I absolutely love. It was designed by a local artist, John Boyd Martin, who would also design the original, the souvenir maps from 1980 to 1987, and we're going to look at some of his other artwork here in just a second as well. This is one of my absolute favorite quotes by Jack Stedman. And it says, "We chose the large multicolored Ascension balloon for a symbol because it represents fun, adventure, and travel, reminiscent of the movie Around the World in 80 Days. These are the things we want Worlds of Fun to represent." All right, so from November 1971 until May of 1973, we have construction of Worlds of Fun. Worlds of Fun was home to numerous rides. This was a Schuss Boomer that was an Anton Schwarzkopf Wildcat as the track arriving on site. This is the pylon for Skyride. It was the Von Roll Skyride. It operated at the park until 1987. Interesting enough, that ride is the whole reason that I got started into History of the Worlds of Fun. I rode it when I was a kid in 1983, and just seeing the park at night was truly magical. And in the 90s, it had been removed from the park, so I went on a tour basically trying to rediscover if that ride had actually ever existed. And I found out that it did, and here we are today. This is Eli, that's the Worlds of Fun Railroad, that's arriving on site. And then Cotton Blossom. Cotton Blossom has an interesting story with it. So I mentioned that Jack Stedman and Lamar Hunt went to the MGM backlot auction in 1970. Well, Lamar Hunt won in Cotton Blossom. Jack Stedman was he didn't know if that was gonna really work. Because how are you gonna move this gigantic boat from California all the way to Missouri, and then rebuild it? Truth be told, he probably had a good reason for his skepticism, because when Cotton Blossom arrived in Kansas City, they had originally supposedly labeled the blueprints with how to reassemble it, put tab A into slot B and everything like that. Well, they didn't exactly label all the blueprints. So when they went to go reconstruct it, they kind of had an unassembled pile of Jenga pieces. They actually had to hire a retired shipbuilder, Wyman Beasley, to reconstruct Cotton Blossom. Thankfully, they got it back together, put Humpty Dumpty back together again, and we got Cotton Blossom. And we got the next slide. There it is, Cotton Blossom on opening day, May 26, 1973. That's Lamar Hunt up there dedicating the park. It was actually kind of a rainy day. And it included a parade that came down Tram Road, included dignitaries from all over Kansas City. And the governor of Missouri, Chris Bond, said, "I heard there was a chance that it was going to rain this morning in the middle of the ceremony, but knowing how Lamar Hunt likes to plan things, I wasn't worried." I mentioned the designer of the hot air balloon logo also created some artwork for the park. This is one of my favorite pieces of World of Fun artwork, promotional artwork. You can see it all over 1973 merchandise. And it was actually commissioned as the first park map. Go ahead. So Worlds of Fun opened with 60 brand new and exciting things to do. This is just a few of them. We have the Victrix, that's the pirate ship from the MGM backlot auction. That actually had a man-o-war cannon range on it until 1980. You can go up there and fire a little miniature cannon. The Oriental Octopus, that was an Irely monster. The Finnish Fling, that was the Chance Rotor, that got replaced by Nordic Chaser in 2018. The Moulin Rouge, that started out with a Can-Can show, and that kind of went by the wayside after a couple of seasons. But last year, we got our Can-Can show back on the Moulin Rouge. I was really excited about that. Safari, that was a Gould ride, and that was, if you guys go to Prowler tonight, that Prowler Plaza area, that is where this ride was. And then, of course, the Worlds of Fun Railroad with the Sky High above it. Interesting story about the Worlds of Fun Railroad. I do not have this confirmed, but it's very possible that the engine wasn't originally supposed to be named Eli. It was actually, possibly, originally supposed to be named the Chief, after the Kansas City Chiefs. When Burlington Northern created its sponsorship, Eli is part of the Burlington Northern history, and that's how he got his name, Eli.
That's going to cost us quite a bit of money these days to change it to the Chief.
Yeah. It can be done. Now, the number 33 on Eli also, we do believe, is actually after a Chiefs player that died during a preseason game back in the 60s. Stone Jackson, I believe is his name, and his jersey number was 33. It was retired after he passed away. And we don't have confirmation of that, but it makes sense. We can go forward. Oh, so this is the 1973 souvenir map. If you guys want to take a look at it, it's over there in the Worlds of Fun History exhibit. This was created by local artist Byron Gash, who did a lot of early concept art for the park. I just love it. Obviously somebody doesn't like it. But just so you guys know, the 6 original rides from 1973, there originally were 15, but the 6 original rides that still exist today are the Viking Voyager, which is over in Scandinavia. It's an Aero Classic Flume ride. The Scrambler, which is a Eli Bridge Scrambler ride. The Flying Dutchman, which is a intimate Flying Dutchman ride. The Autobahn, which opened as Der Fender Bender in 1973. Yes. And the Taxi Tour, which is also an Aero ride. And then finally, of course, the Worlds of Fun Railroad. So those are the original 6 classic rides that you can still ride today. All right, so Worlds of Fun opened with 3 coasters. The first, of course, was the beloved Zambezi Zinger, which was the second of the 4 Anton Schwarzkopf speed racers that were extended jumbo jets. As many of you know, it was manufactured by Anton Schwarzkopf and designed by Werner Stingel. It was introduced, obviously, May 26, 1973, and retired after 1997. It is still currently in operation at Park del Cafe in Montenegro, Colombia. And I actually have gone down there and ridden it down there about 5 years ago. It's still a great ride. Oh, if you do go by the Zambezi Zinger Q line or Q house, if you did that earlier today, there's a lot of homage to the snakes in the tunnel, and that's just an urban legend that goes back with the original Zambezi Zinger, that the original Zambezi Zinger actually did have snakes in the tunnel, but you know, none of them fell on anybody or anything like that. It's just a great funny story.
There may or may not be photos of that.
There are photos of that?
I don't know.
All right, moving on. We have Schussboomer. I love this ride because it's just got the most awesome name. It's also manufactured by Anton Schwarzkopf and designed by Werner Stingel. It was a Wildcat model. Here's the thing, we don't know exactly which model it was because there were 3. It was also slightly different than all the other Anton Schwarzkopf Wildcats out there. We have theorized this could possibly be because it was the prototype model. We really don't know. We do know that the park bought it used. Again, it's got the most amazing story with its name is that it was named by Chiefs Hall of Fame kicker, and I'm going to screw this up, I know, Jan Stunerud. If you guys don't know, he presented the AFC Championship trophy at the AFC Championship last year. And just so you guys know, if you're in the park, that was located where the Grand Carousel is today. All right, so that was 1970. Oh, by the way, the third coaster, I didn't actually cut the slide. That was the funicular. That was an Alan Herschel kiddie coaster that was over in Europa. So moving on to 1974 to 75 expansions, we have the Forum Amphitheater. That was a massive expansion. People loved that thing for several years. If you guys would like to see a whole schedule of who performed at the Forum Amphitheater, go to worldsofFun.org. I do have a schedule actually on the website. If you see any shirts throughout the park with Sam Panda, Daniel, Coon, and Gertrude Gorilla, those were the second series of park mascots introduced in 1975. They lasted until the 1990s. And then this is one of the more interesting rides. This is the Red Baron. It's a kiddie ride, which you don't think would really be all that interesting, but it's still in the park. It is the park's oldest kiddie ride. It's still up there in Planet Snoopy. It was moved there to that location in 1978 and had 5 land changes around it, but it never moved. We'll look at that in just a second. You go ahead. So the first park ride coaster expansion was in 1976 with the Scream Roller. This was manufactured by Aero Development. It was the 5th version of the Aero Corkscrew, and it opened obviously on April 10, 1976. Probably one of the most interesting parts of Scream Roller is that if you go to Timberwolf today, and you ride Timberwolf, has anybody ridden Timberwolf? Okay. You notice how the gates don't line up to the cars? That's because they line up to this ride. Timberwolf uses the exact same queue line and queue house and queue rails as this coaster. And in fact, if you go through the queue line, you can see the footers for it. It's all over the place, which I love that. And I mentioned that. And then of course it was replaced by Timberwolf in 1989. So this really got the ball rolling as far as park expansions. In 1977, we got something brand new in every world. This is the Singapore Sling. Today it's Bamboozler. It, like many other rides in the park, has been moved around and renamed several times. It got added in 1977. Also added in 1977 was the Bounceroos. Now, I have an interesting theory about this ride. Does anybody grow up with Kings Island in the 70s? Okay, does anybody remember a ride there called Kiki Kangaroos? Looks like Kiki Kangaroos. Kiki Kangaroos got removed in 76. We got this in 77. Further interesting is that Worlds of Fun had an Alan Herschel helicopter ride until 1976. Guess what Kings Island got in 77? An Alan Herschel helicopter ride. So I don't have any theory. It just seems to work as a possible storyline. I don't know. Okay, so moving on to 78. So 78, we got the new aerodrome section. You know how I mentioned Red Baron got moved around, or got moved? This is where Red Baron got moved to. It was themed to flight. Included the Bradley and Kay Barnstormer ride. There's only 3 of those ever built. This was the second one, and it would last until 1983. And then in 1979, we also had several other rides that got added that year. Zulu, still operating. Zulu would replace the Safari ride. It uses the same queue house as the Safari ride did from 1973. And La Carousel got added in 1979 as well.
Yeah.
Oh, they changed the slide, I didn't even notice. Yep, we got the Immortal Orient Express, the making of a monster. That was its tagline when it opened in 1980. Like Screamroller, it was manufactured by Aero Development and designed by Ron Toomer. And one of the things with Worlds of Fun is that they've always, from the very beginning, they always had this influence on wanting to keep the beautiful natural beauty of the site that they chose, with the old trees and the beautiful rolling Clay County hillside, which we all love. We love it even more as we get older and we gotta climb up those hills. But Ron Toomer's got a great quote about this that I'd like to share. The Orient Express was designed to correspond with the existing ground layout, preserving as many trees and natural features as possible. We were commissioned by Worlds of Fun to design a major coaster which not only provides an exciting ride experience, but a spectacular visual effect. One important point also that kind of sometimes gets glossed over with Orient Express and its history is that it does have a very important history in roller coaster history. It actually was what I consider the first big aero multi-looper coaster, in that it introduced something other than a corkscrew or loop. In this case, it introduced what the park called the kamikaze curve. You guys know it as a boomerang or the batwing element. This was the first coaster to ever use it. And then, of course, it was also named after Murder on the Orient Express by Agatha Christie. It was introduced on April 4th, 1980, and retired in September of 2003. So after 1980 on Orient Express, we had several ride expansions, attractions, expansions. We had Incredidome to the Aerodrome, as the Cinema 180 theater. Kids my age just loved that thing. In 1982, that was the park's 10th anniversary. We saw several expansions. We got Oceans of Fun, which was billed as the world's largest water park at the time for 60 acres. We also got the new River City section for 1982. If you guys have been over by the River City Grill, that's what it's named after. River City Grill actually stands exactly where that ride is, right there. That is what is known today as a Fjord Fyrling, but came to the park as the River City Rampage. And if you look to the right of that building right next to it, that is actually still used as Patriot Landing, gift shop. All right, moving along. This gave Worlds of Fun, they gave themselves the title of Roller Coaster Capital of the World. Don't laugh, Orient Express is great. All right, huh?
Cedar Point might have a problem with that.
Well, this was 1983. All right, so we have the nation's first stand-up coaster. It opened on May 31st, 1983. It was actually a conversion of the Screamroller to a stand-up coaster. It kind of looks kind of uncomfortable. Aerohoos came in and converted these sit-down trains to stand-up pods. And it would last until June of 1984 when it would be converted back to a sit-down coaster because it kept, why? Because it kept breaking the lift hill chain. Something about the weight of the cars. Yeah. Oh, there we go. All right, so one of the interesting things, I decided to include 2 souvenir maps in this presentation. The 1973 map, because that was my husband's first souvenir map. This was my first souvenir map in 1983. And this was also done by John Boyd Martin. If you guys remember that original concept art, the balloon artwork, same artist. And you can see the aerodrome, the Barnstormer up there. That was the last year for that. I just love the souvenir maps. Go ahead. All right, so continuing on into the 80s, we have the Fury of the Nile that was introduced in 1984. That was, at the time, the world's largest rapids ride. It was also the first rapids ride in the United States to have a turntable loading system. Probably one of my favorite stories, this is probably more of an engineering kind of fun, interesting story about Fury of the Nile, is that it was designed, it had a feature designed by local engineering firm Burns and McDonnell, that instead of having what I usually call an ugly lake, a separate lake to hold the water, it actually can hold the water inside the ride itself, which is, for me, totally awesome. So 1985 was a huge shows year, so we got the Haunted Theater, that was right here, that was done by Mark Wilson. I think he did one for Kings Island too, I believe. It was here from 85 to 86. And we have the Omegatron in 1986. That was the Vekoma Skyflyer. It was Vekoma Skyflyer. There's only a couple of those left in operation, and they're all overseas. I know that Legendia in Poland has one, but there just were never that many of them made. One of the interesting stories with this, if you go out, you see the EXT costume that's out there. By the way, that was my husband's costume. They updated that Buck Rogers costume look to include the Omegatron logo because they were part of the same ride complex. And probably one of the most memorable things that I always hear about Omegatron, and then I remember about Omegatron, is the sound. It had a very distinctive whine sound, and then you could always hear everybody's change falling out of their and I have to say, that change probably funded some interesting ambassador activities afterwards. By the way, interesting detail is that, if you haven't figured out, World of Fun does call its employees ambassadors. This is going back all the way to 1973 because you're taking a tour around the world and you're being assisted by your ambassadors to that world. Yes, thank you, Eli. I agree. Oh, I didn't get to talk about Pandemonium. Okay, there we go. Pandemonium, this is my childhood right here. 1987, I mentioned Sam Panda, Daniel Kuhn, Gertrude Gorilla, PJ Panda. You see a lot of, he actually has kind of seen a resurgence here recently, which I love. PJ Panda was kind of like the shorter version of that we all loved as children that grew up in the 80s and 90s. Now you can go. All right, so moving on to Timberwolves. All right. It opened on April 1st, 1989. It was our April Fool's baby, as I like to call it. It was designed by Curtis Summers and designed by Charlie Dinn. It's called a modified out and back. It did originally have a 560-degree helix. Interesting story. Pretty much how I mentioned Jack Stedman went around to all these different parks to get ideas. Well, that was kind of a tradition with Hun Midwest. They would go to all these different parks and just kind of borrow ideas from them. So what they did with Timberwolf, for several years before it was built, they would go to different parks and say, well, we like this and we like that, and then combine it, have somebody combine it into a new ride for them. Timberwolf's major influences were the Cyclone in Coney Island and the Beast at Kings Island, which is where the 560-degree helix idea came from. In 2018, though, the 560-degree helix was removed and replaced by Great Coasters International. By the way, this is Jack Stedman. If you guys remember Jack Stedman, founder of the park, he's cutting the ribbon for Timberwolf there. Okay, go ahead. Oh. So 1990, and you didn't really see any major capital investments. It did see the painting of Orient Express at that time. I love this detail. The park did host an event for the anniversary of the Orient Express, its 10th anniversary, called Coaster Mayhem. You're welcome. You're welcome, Stephen. So in the 90s, this were the last couple of years of Planet Midwest, they added B Street, which was actually River City. So this is when River City Rampage became Fjord Fairlane. It moved over to Scandinavia. We had the Himalaya. I love this ride, the Rock and Railer. That got retired after 2005 when they added Patriot. In 92, this was kind of, I consider this pretty revolutionary. They added Monsoon. That wasn't revolutionary. What was revolutionary is the same-day gateway. I had mentioned they had built Oceans of Fun adjacent to Worlds of Fun in 1982. In 1992, for the first time, you could walk between the two different water parks. They were still separate admissions, but you could actually walk between the two, and I thought that was pretty revolutionary at the time. 1994, if you remember Victrix got taken out 92, 93, Sea Dragon replaced it. If you go over to Sea Dragon, the water is clear, you can actually still see the outline of the Victrix keel. Cyclone Sam's was added in 95. I know a lot of people don't know what this ride is when they walk by it. It's actually a chance wipe, make sure I get this right, chance wipeout. Yes. Thank you. Replaced a Chance Trabant. That's the funny thing. There was a Chance Trabant that was on this exact same site until 93. Yes, the Wobble Well. Thank you very much. And Cyclone Sam's, if you can tolerate it, it's a very intense ride, but it's very fun, and it's got a really kind of cool storyline, like you're stuck in a cyclone.
Wacky Worm. Wacky Worm. Ace.
So yes, you see the Ace. So Wacky Worm, that was introduced in 1993. Now Ace held its CoasterCon here. I think it was CoasterCon 16. I didn't look that one up, I apologize. So in honor of Ace, Worlds of Fun put these little themed block lights in front of Wacky Worm that spelled out ACE for the American Coaster Enthusiasts. I don't know for sure who designed and built this ride. I said Fabre Rides. That is taken from a Missouri inspection report, but the press release from the park says it's a Pinfari. So I don't, who knows? It opened in 93. It got renamed and rethemed in 2012 to Cosmic Coaster, and that's where it is right now. It is the park's second oldest roller coaster after Timberwolf, actually. So we have our silver anniversary, which actually was in 1997, but I kind of lump 1996 with that too. Detonator, which is still in the park. It was an S&S first generation space shot. This is one of the earliest space shots ever built. It was also the first dual tower permanent installation in an amusement park. If you notice, the towers don't go all the way up, and that's because it's a first generation ride. In 97, they also, 97, oh wait, I labeled that wrong. I guess it was 96 they got Ripcord, I apologize, it was 96. Ripcord replaced Cotton Blossom in that lake, it's still there today. And then of course in 97 we've got the Berenstein Bear Country. That replaced the Aerodrome, or that replaced Pandemonium. Mamba, poised to strike in 1998. That was his tagline. It was manufactured by D.H. Morgan Manufacturing and designed by Steve Okamoto. It was the last of the three Morgan triplets after Wild Thing and Steel Force. And yes, I might be a little bit biased, but it's my favorite of the three. It was introduced on April 18th, 1998. As big difference between Wild Thing, Steel Force, and Mamba. Those two have tunnels, Mamba does not. Mamba was designed to have tunnels. It actually, in the initial press release, says it's supposed to have tunnels. And when I worked on the ride in 2007, my lead advised me that in the shack at the far end of the ride, there are switches for enclosure 1 and enclosure 2, which means it probably was electrically wired for those tunnels, but they got cut because Mamba did go a little bit over budget.
Let's add them.
Huh?
Let's add them now.
Yeah, can we add the tunnels now? I love that idea.
Buy a season pass. Even better.
But it's still an awesome ride. And then 3 years ago, they redid the control system on this ride, and it has been running totally awesome. And it is my favorite coaster in the park, biased. You can move on. All right, that's some weird editing on that slide. This was supposed to be a lot bigger, like this was supposed to be legible, I don't know. Anyway, so a decade of change. So from 1995 until 2004, and I know I'm skipping around a little bit, but this kind of encompasses stuff that's happened before and stuff that will happen afterwards. We had a lot of change that occurred in the park. One of the things over the years since this has occurred is I realized that sometimes change has to happen, and sometimes that change can be good. So while we lost the Zambezi Zinger and the Orient Express, we got Haunt. If you've ever been here during Haunt, it is so super and massively packed, it's crazy. It is the peak time of the season, and they do an awesome job on it, I have to say that. This was one of the very first haunts they created back in 2003, Carnival of Carnivorous Clowns. Please bring it back. It was awesome. That's my vote for that. So Cedar Fair obviously took over ownership in June of 1995. The sale closed in July of 1995. One major change, if you guys have been here, if anybody had been here before 1995, you might remember the gate being in a different place. So the main gate was moved from Americana, and is where Steelhawk is now. It was moved to Scandinavia, where it currently is today. In 2001, Camp Snoopy replaced Berenstein Bear Country. And if you remember me mentioning Red Baron's still staying there and getting its name changed. The Orient Express gave its last ride in September of 2003. And 2003, 2004, that's when Halloween started its massive expansion with Carnival of Carnivorous Clowns, and then Laura the Vampire, which is celebrating its 20th anniversary this year. All right, so as I mentioned, with change can be good. Change can be good. We got 5 coasters. I call it a decade, the coaster decade. It's not exactly a decade. It's like 1998 to 2009, but it sounds good. So we have 1998, we got Mamba. In 2000, they introduced the boomerang on April 8th. And of course, it's a standard Vekoma boomerang. Spinning Dragons was introduced only 4 years later. That's a Gerstlauer spinner. That was only the second Gerstlauer spinner. The very first one was at Mall of America. Interesting thing, if you guys are in line, because you might be waiting a little bit for Spinning Dragons, notice the fountain in the center of the ride. That is the old dolphin pool. World of Fun had a dolphin show until 1996, and that is the dolphin pool. The wall that you're standing on is actually the old retaining wall for the dolphin show, which is really kind of neat. All right, moving on. In 2006, we got Patriot. It was introduced on April 8, 2006. It was manufactured by Bolliger and Mabillard of Switzerland. And as I mentioned, we went River City, we went Beat Street, now we got Patriot Plaza. Basically, it's all using that same footprint, that same land. Interesting story. We interviewed Rob Decker a couple of years after this was built, and we were commenting about the stripe, because we all love the stripe, and they repainted it a couple of years with the stripe, which I love. Originally, the supports were also supposed to have stars, but they felt that it made the design too busy, so they took the stars out of the design. Great story about this. Back in 2019, when the Chiefs played the Patriots in the AFC Championship, they renamed Patriot to the Patrick for Patrick Mahomes. And they actually redid the whole sign. It's great. There's a picture of it online. It's hilarious. Prowler, a beast of a coaster. Prowler was introduced on May 1st, 2009. It was manufactured by Great Coasters International. Funny story, when we were here for CoasterCon 2009, a friend of ours said, I liked it, but it does all these twists and turns. It's like, no it doesn't, it's pretty much out and back. And I just love that, because you didn't even know where you're going. If you ride it at night, this thing is amazing at night. So definitely ride it at night. One of my favorite stories of how rides get their name was originally supposed to be named the Jackal, or that was one of its proposed names, and they didn't go with that because they thought the logo might be conflicting with Timberwolf because they were both dogs, I guess. It was voted Best New Ride by Amusement Today in 2009, and I think it is still one of Worlds of Fun's best coasters. Sorry, I still like Mamba. It's my number 2. All right, you can go ahead. All right, so 2010 to 2018, we're just skipping right along here. We have the, make sure I get this order right here. So we got the Grand Carousel in 2011, and then, yeah, they did the Planet Snoopy. So they converted Camp Snoopy to Planet Snoopy in 2011. That was a big, massive expansion. I think they added several rides with that. As many of you know, the Grand Carousel came from Jogga Lake. Some of you guys may remember used to have a rocking mechanism at Jogga Lake. The reason it doesn't here is because when they were installing the ride, they were either given the choice that it had a rocking mechanism and had seatbelts, or it didn't, and it didn't have seatbelts, and they chose the option to not have seatbelts, which I agree with. And they did an amazing job at restoring the ride. It's amazing. So they did a Planet Snoopy expansion in 2016, Steelhawk 2014. That's where the old gate was. This actually was relocated from Knott's Berry Farm. Mustang Runner is 2017, and then Nordic Chaser in 2018 to replace the Finish Flame, which was the old Chance Rotor. All right, so we come to the end. We have 2023 that was celebrated as the 50th anniversary of the park, and 50 years of adventure was the tagline for it. They reimagined the Zambezi Zinger. I'm so sorry you guys don't get to ride it. I was just totally disappointed when I heard about that. I've ridden it. I'm disappointed that you guys didn't get to ride it. They reused the original Zinger queue line. They really worked with the original storylines with the original Zambezi Zinger, like the Snakes in the Tunnel story. And then of course it has the spiral lift hill. I still for this day can't believe they even tried to recreate that. And then of course you have the history exhibit. They did an amazing job. If you have not checked out the history exhibit, please check it out. This is actually the second to last weekend of it. It's really extremely, there we go. And then last but not least was the Moulin Rouge. They did a 50th anniversary show last year, which is kind of a compilation of a lot of old Moulin Rouge shows. And then they kind of modified it for this year. But my favorite part is the Can-Can, that they brought that back from 1973. That was totally awesome. I'm so sorry you guys didn't get to see it because it ended last week. But it was a great show. And that's pretty much about it as far as Worlds of Fun history goes. Like I said, I run a website, worldsofun.org. I have pretty much every souvenir map from the park over the years. It's online. I've got timelines, all sorts of stuff. And I love talking Worlds of Fun history. So if you have any questions, if you want to hear a whole long speech, you can ask. But I love talking about it, so don't ever feel bad about asking any questions. And that's pretty much it.
Let's hear it for Jen.
Jennifer, I think I speak for all of us when I say that that was one of the most in-depth park history presentations. And I love that so much. Every time you said, here's an interesting story, or here's a fun fact, I was all ears. You had so many good little tidbits. We love all of that stuff. I think we have time for a few questions, just because we are recording for the podcast. I will have to repeat your question. And if we could keep it 2 questions about park history, not about the future or about current ride operations or anything like that. If we're just talking about Worlds of Fun history in this chat. So yes, right there.
There's a water tower that's painted like the blue logo. Is that affiliated with the park, or was that affiliated with the park, or is that still in use by the park?
It's a question about the water tower. Is the water tower that is painted like a hot air balloon near the park part of the park?
It is not a part of the park. It's not owned by the park. You want?
Yeah, so I actually asked, Lee Darrow was the GM at this park from 74 to 88 for a few years, but there was a lot of mention of Jack Stedman in this presentation, and he was Lamar Hunt's business brain. He was really the guy who dreamt up Arrowhead Stadium and then executed it. He was a very, very important part of Kansas City history, and he was the GM of the park, president of the park for many, many years. But Lee Darrow, who was the GM of the park, he was actually the director of publicity for the park, and Clay County was building a new water tower, and around the same time that Worlds of Fun was being constructed. And the Clay County Commissioner called Lee Darrow and said, hey, we're thinking about painting a big Clay County block, ugly, lettering on the water tower. And he said, okay, thanks for letting me know. And they said, well, we know it's gonna be kind of an eyesore next to your park. Would you guys want to brand it? And he said, well, how much is that gonna cost me? And he said about $8,000. And so he went to Jack Stedman's office and he said, hey, Clay County wants to paint that brand new water tower that's about 200 feet tall. It's probably the most iconic landmark in the Northland. And Stedman goes, how much? He goes, $8,000. And Stedman goes, do it. So that is probably the most valuable advertisement that we have for this park, and it was purchased for $8,000. So I think $8,000 gets us a Coca-Cola vending machine these days. So that's a significant. It's just one of those little decisions. Who knows, what happens if we don't make that decision at that point in time? If we are as iconic as we are now, probably. But that is just such an important landmark to us, and it really gets people asking, what is that? What is that? It's Worlds of Fun. It's a beautiful thing to have as a marketer.
And when I was a kid growing up, that's how we always knew we were near Worlds of Fun. I love that water tower.
Another question? Oh, right here in front.
Yeah, I actually have a question. When the museum section closes about 2 weeks, what will happen to the Orient Express front car?
There's a question about the museum out front. What was going to happen to the Orient Express front car that's in the museum when it closes?
So that is actually on loan from us very generously from the National Roller Coaster Museum in Plano, Texas. She's not here, but our brand manager, Rita Hanch, when we were doing our anniversary planning for the 50th, we all sat down and we said, we need one more thing. And she said, I've always wanted to do a museum. And we were like, well, there's got to be a hook, there's got to be a main attraction to it. Is there any car that a relic that we can put in there? And we obviously started saying, is there an old Mamba car? Well, the Mamba's all right there, you can go sit in one, whatever, big deal. Is there an original Zambezi Zinger one? Urban legend is that they threw it in the Missouri River and they're no longer around. But that is not true, it is in Columbia. But we then went on a search for an Orient Express lead car. You guys said that you were positive that one still existed. And we went on the hunt for it, and literally not 2 weeks later, I kid you not, I pull up a Facebook post by the National Roller Coaster Museum saying that they had found the original, I think it's the third train, the lead car from the Orient Express. And so it was one of those, it was serendipitous to a degree. And we said, we'll be taking that back now. Thank you very much. I know you guys just found it. But yeah, that was where we found it. And they very generously gave it to us. It was on a flatbed truck for about 2 days coming up from Texas to Kansas City. And we were getting on Twitter and Facebook, people were taking pictures of it on the highway. It was a very cool moment, and it's a real bummer that it's not gonna be here anymore, but it was so cool that we got to have that for as long as we did. They very generously extended the loan till this year. That is a wonderful, wonderful organization. If you guys ever want to donate to them, they have a fantastic team. They are a nonprofit, they're all volunteers, and they have some incredible things. If you guys ever, I'm sure you guys have been down there, but if you haven't, it's truly one of the more impressive things. That is it's theme park adjacent, very cool. I highly recommend going and see them.
We have time for one more question, and yes, we love the National Roller Coaster Museum. One more. Oh, Bill Linkenheimer.
Next to Flying Dutchman, there is a seating area that's fenced off, appears to be an old ride slab. Was that a ride or was it?
Was the seating area next to the Flying Dutchman an old ride slab?
Falcon's Flight. And it was the carousel before that.
That's also where the kiddie coaster originally was. The Funicular kiddie coaster was located there.
Yeah, Falcon's Flight was an interesting ride. It never worked. So that's really why it's not here anymore. Unfortunately, it was a German-designed ride with a very complex operating system. So unfortunately, as wonderful of a ride as that was, talk to Jeff Mast if you want to hear about it. But it was a very unique ride that unfortunately the downtime was just too much.
Thank you so much, Brian, Jennifer, Rick. This has been incredible. It's so amazing. You can really tell your love and passion, not just for this park, but also for roller coasters, just like us. And so we just appreciate you having us here. Would everybody mind if we did a quick little wrap up for the podcast episode? If y'all would help me out with this. When I say we hope you get to ride, you all say a coaster today. All right, got it nice and loud, and then cheer afterwards. It'll be a great wrap up to this wonderful weekend. So here we go. All right. This is our last part of Preservation Conference. What an incredible weekend, and there is still more fun to come tonight, but thank you all for being here. And those of you listening at home, not here at CornCon, as we have affectionately called it, please make sure you pay attention to all of ACE's social media and publications for more coverage and footage from this week. And if you're listening at home and you haven't joined ACE yet, what are you waiting for? Check out ridewithace.com for more information and join us at our next event. Thanks for listening. We hope you get to ride.